It's 1:30 p.m. in Lagos, same time in London, and we're bringing you markets analysis and insights on Business Incorporated live from Channels Television here in Lagos. Here's what's coming up on the program. Italy cancels Egypt's $100 million debt. And Morocco targets 2 million tons of wheat imports in the last quarter of this year. And first electric minibus taxi paves the way for EV transition in South Africa. Welcome to the program. I'm Will Ibang. Let's kick off the program with market numbers. Let's head to Africa, where it's mostly positive sentiments at intraday. We see the South Africa's NGX up 0.22%, except for in Nigeria, where we have that 0.36% down more than a third of a percent, 67,000 points there. Let's look at Egypt, what they did at intraday. We see them up at intraday, 0.47%, almost half a percent, 20,000 points. That's a good one for that equity. And then Kenya closing Friday's session in the red, 0.14% down. Let's now see what's happening at the NGX, see what's driving sentiments there. We're bringing in Mercy Okon. She's research analyst with Parthian Securities Limited. Good afternoon, Mercy. What's happening at the NGX? We see NGX down 0.36%. Intraday, what's going on there?
Hi, Will. Thank you for having me. So yeah, as you rightly say, as of this afternoon, that's midday, the market was negative by 0.36%. And what happened was that as of this morning, when the market opened, we started seeing investors selling down their positions on Access. And this sell pressure was majorly driven by investors' reaction to the dividend declaration of 30 kobo. And you would observe that when the likes of FBNH, GTCO, UBA recently, you would observe that they declared about 50 kobo dividend payment. So the investors were expecting that that Access was going to do same. However, but that wasn't the case. Hence why you were seeing the sell-off in Access. However, it could be because oh my God, sorry. Okay, yeah, it could be because the bank is trying to be conservative following the whole announcement from CBN advising banks not to pay dividend from the FX gain that they recently saw.
So we did see that drop. We know that Access Bank, when the results came out, the dividend declaration came out Friday, most investors were not pleased with that outcome. They were expecting more, like you said. But looking at other banks that have declared dividend, we've seen today Zenith Bank is marking down for a 50 kobo dividend payout. So how's that stock? What's happening to Zenith Bank at the moment?
Yeah, so since the markdown, we observed that the stocks is actually doing quite well because we're seeing that investors are trying to buy into the dip, taking advantage of that markdown we've seen, right? And as of this afternoon, it was trading at 32.55, up from the 32.50 that it was marked down at, right? So I know I was trying to say something about Access Bank earlier before there was a slight break in transmission. I just wanted to add to that as of Friday, they actually released their results, and the results were actually quite fantastic, right? And we saw about 192 million in terms of FX gain. Another interesting thing is for Owando stock, we saw that they've been closing negatively lately since Thursday, and that could be because of the expectation regarding on what the court hearing date, what the court hearing outcome would be. So we're just waiting to see what happens in that aspect. So yeah, Zenith Bank is doing quite well as of midday today, and then Access Bank is also coming back up, and this is because investors are trying to buy into the dip, right? It's currently, as of midday, it was trading at 16.55, within the range of 16.20 to 16.25. And then you'll see that the bids are beginning to increase compared to what it opened at in the morning.
Okay, so we'll also look at what UBA is doing, but I don't know what they're currently trading at currently at intraday. Can you just tell us what UBA's share price is, or how it's performing at intraday?
UBA is actually doing quite well, and this is because, I don't know if you know this, that qualification date is tomorrow, and then the payment date for dividend is on Wednesday, and we're currently seeing investors trying to take positions to take advantage of this dividend payment. And I'd like to add to that, saying that the sell pressure that we are seeing, like an insight to that could be because you're seeing investors exit their position in Access to take advantage of the dividend payment that is about to happen in UBA. So yeah, UBA is actually doing quite well now.
There's a wave of investors right now, Mercy, so we'll dig in. Thank you so much, Mercy Okon, research analyst with Party and Securities Limited, for those insights. Now we go over to the Middle East, where markets were mostly negative at intraday, not against what we say in Africa. Abu Dhabi was down 0.13%. We see Dubai, however, in the green, 0.32%. Let's see how Saudi performed. Saudi was down bloody for that region, 0.35%, and Qatar was also down 0.23%. Now, the EU Commissioner, the EU Trade Commissioner, Valdis Dombrovskis is in Beijing to hold trade talks with Chinese officials amid rising tensions. Deutsche Welle correspondent Chimponda Chimbelu is following the story from Berlin. Chimponda, what does the EU trade chief aim to achieve?
Thanks for having me, Will. The aim of Valdis Dombrovskis' visit is to show that while the EU wants to continue to trade with China, it wants fairer conditions. One of the major issues of contention right now is the trade deficit. It reached a new record of nearly 400 billion euros in 2022. That is nearly double what it was just 2 years earlier. Meanwhile, Brussels has also observed that the investment climate in China has worsened, and it is becoming harder for European firms to do business in the world's second biggest economy. Another turning point, of course, was Russia's invasion of Ukraine last year. It laid bare the differences between the EU and China. EU trade chief Dombrovskis said that Beijing's refusal to condemn Moscow poses a reputational risk for China. He also added that a more politicized business environment has left European companies struggling to understand their obligations and questioning their future in the world's second biggest economy. Now, on his 4-day trip, Dombrovskis has also been defending the EU's plans to de-risk. He says that EU plans to reduce dependence on China, are reasonable, and he's been pointing to the trade imbalance as an example.
Well, we hear what Dombrovskis is saying, but how are EU businesses dealing with the EU-China trade row?
Well, businesses from Europe fear that the trade tensions could lead to a tariff war between the EU and China. Brussels has launched an investigation looking into whether Chinese subsidies for electric vehicles are giving EVs made in China an unfair advantage. If it finds that that is the case, the EU could very well end up imposing tariffs on Chinese-made EVs. Now, for its part, Beijing has called the investigation a pure protectionist move. And last week, China's special representative for Europe, Wu Hongbo, said that Europe's China-critical policies are, quote, pressuring a superpower at the cost of Europe's prosperity and stability, end quote. And there, the Chinese representative was also referring to the export restrictions on microchips from the Netherlands. This is not an easy environment for European businesses, and it's not just the differences between the EU and China. The European Chamber of Commerce in Beijing also says that the world's second biggest economy has become a harder place to do business. In a paper which it released last week, it put that down to some of the erratic policy shifts we have seen coming from Beijing, including the lockdowns during the COVID pandemic. It also warned that China's increasing focus on national security is making companies uneasy about doing business in the country, as are rules about cross-border data transfer.
While we navigate this EU-China rule, what can we expect from markets today?
Well, Germany's blue chip index, the DAX, is expected to trade lower today. European investors are still cautious after the U.S. Fed rate decision last week, which, of course, the U.S. Fed decided to pause rate hikes last week. But investors will also be looking at monetary policy in Europe. ECB President Christine Lagarde will appear before the European Parliament's Economic Committee for a routine hearing. And then there's also the bad news coming from China and its ailing property market. Evergrande has said it is unable to issue new debt because of an investigation into one of its subsidiaries. And then when it comes to news from across the pond, investors will be watching the looming debt ceiling battle in the U.S. Now, that, of course, is bound to add uncertainty when it comes to investing in U.S. assets.
We're going to be keeping watch and track on that. Thank you so much, Iponda Chimbelu, Deutsche Welle correspondent there in Berlin, giving us the updates. Now we cross over to Asia, where markets are mixed as investors look toward inflation data from across the region this week. Singapore and Australia are expected to report inflation figures for August this week, while Japan will release inflation data for the Tokyo region. The capital region's inflation data is seen as a leading indicator of nationwide trends. Australia's S&P 200 rose 0.11%, reversing earlier losses and ending at 7,076 points. Japan's Nikkei 225 climbed 0.85 and the Topix was up 0.39%, rebounding from losses last week. South Korea's Kospi split 0.49%, and we're seeing that index, the Hang Seng Index, slipping 1.82% as it hits the final hour of trade, with mainland Chinese markets also in negative territory. Now to the U.S., where stock futures edged lower early today as the markets are set to enter the last week of trading in September with big losses. Futures on the Dow Jones Industrial Average lost 0.1%. S&P 500 futures and NASDAQ 100 futures fell 0.18 and 0.21%. Stocks have struggled this month as the Federal Reserve signaled higher interest rates for longer periods, sending bond yields rising. The benchmark index, the 10-year Treasury yields, have surged more than 30 basis points this month to 4.43%. The market also contended with a rally in crude oil and a winning streak in the dollar during the seasonal weak trading month. Now we'll go over to the oil space, where prices rose on Monday as investors focused on a tighter supply outlook after Moscow issued a temporary ban on fuel imports while remaining wary of further rate hikes that could dampen demand. Brent crude futures climbed 48 cents to $93.75 a barrel after settling 3 cents lower on Friday. U.S. West Texas Intermediate crude futures extended gains for a second straight session, trading at $90.53 a barrel, up 50 cents. Now, crude oil prices appear to have started the week on a front foot as the market continues to digest Russia's temporary ban on diesel and gasoline exports into an already tight market amid U.S. Fed's hawkish message that rates will remain higher for longer. Now, gold edged lower on Monday after eking out a narrow gain last week as investors assess the U.S. Federal Reserve's official decision to flag further interest rate hikes ahead of a consumer inflation print later this week. Spot gold was down 0.1% at $1,922 per ounce, while U.S. gold futures fell 0.2% to $1,942.30 per ounce. Investors await the personal consumption expenditures price index, while also keeping an eye on events in Washington, where U.S. lawmakers are haggling over a spending bill with a September 30th deadline to avert a potential government shutdown. Now, spot silver fell 0.3% to $23.47 per ounce. Platinum shed 0.5%, and palladium dropped 0.2%. Thank you for staying with us. Now, over the weekend, hundreds of demonstrators gathered in the Ghanaian capital, Accra, for a third day of anti-government protests linked to economic hardship. Protesters were decrying the high cost of living and the lack of jobs as they marched the streets. Now, Harrison Ahogba, financial analyst, joins us virtually from Ghana. Harrison, this is not the first time Ghanaians will be protesting high cost of living. We've seen that Ghana has been battling this economic crisis brought on by spurring public debt. But what's different about this one, especially after the country has just received some of the $3 billion bailout fund from the IMF?
So good afternoon, Will, and thank you for the opportunity. Amazingly, it's not even going to be the last one because we have one pending very soon. So what it is you would admit this has been long coming. Prior to IMF, you heard the populists and the government, especially the opposition, even saying that they wanted to have the finance minister out of position, to the extent that the government, through the presidency, mentioned that we should allow the IMF processes to finish before you take a step. Fast forward, this particular demonstration is novel because it's a 3-day demonstration. It started on Thursday and ended on Saturday. And guess what? Married number of people joined from just expressing the difficulty we are experiencing in the country, mismanagement, perceived corruption, allegation of brutalities, and all those things. So I can agree with you that it is not the first, certainly not going to be the last. But as we can see from the images over the weekend, everybody that was interested trooped to the venue and expressed their misgivings about how they feel the country is being governed and the impact it is having on businesses, individuals, and households.
So we know that Ghana has just received like $600 million out of the $3 billion loan from the IMF. Can you break down how this fund has been deployed so far? How has it been utilized? And why are we seeing this crisis if we have this money?
That is even one of the challenges with which the populists are expressing their misgivings. As we speak, we know $600 million was disbursed as a first tranche. Currently, IMF team are in the country reviewing how that $600 million was used. Details are quite scanty, but I can say the expectation to receive the next tranche is dependent on how well the first one was used. Having said that, the impact of the $600 million has not been felt. Issues of inflation, issues of economic hardship has really not changed. As we speak, the government reference rate for lending, which we call the monetary policy rate, is around 30%. So what it means is that even before you think of going for a loan, you are starting off with 30% before the financial institutions to add their rates premium and other administrative charges. Treasury bill average 91 days is around 28%. So all these things means that the real impact of the IMF deal, especially the first tranche, has really not been felt. And I struggle to see how it was used and how the next one will be used, hence the review by IMF to direct us for the next steps.
So we talked about the reference interest rate, that's the policy rate, which is at 30%. And we do know that the August inflation rates fell, unexpectedly. Do you think this will, as some analysts are expecting, will make the Apex Bank hold rates, that the Bank of Ghana is going to hold rates in the upcoming MPC meeting? Or do you see them hiking rates further?
The next MPC meeting is 25th of this month, which is like some 2 days away. I doubt if they will have any impact on the rate now. I'm suspecting, and from where we sit as analysts, the rate might be maintained. However, in terms of the inflation drop, it was strange, and analysts were surprised because July was 43.1, then August it came to 40. It has not really affected the basket of food, the cost of expenditure in doing business and all, because individuals and organizations are still struggling in the manufacturing and service sector that the nationwide. So I struggle to see if the rate to be hiked. I would, however, expect that it should be maintained at the current 30%.
So you mentioned the pending strike for coming up soon. What's that about? Can you tell us why we're going to see another strike in Ghana?
Well, it's not so different from what happened over the weekend, but this one is being spearheaded by the main opposition party, the NDC. A few weeks ago, a report came out that the legislator for the banks, which is the Bank of Ghana, was putting up a new head office structure, which at the time the cost is estimated was $81 million, but for some reason, from the documents available, have ballooned to $250 million. So the opposition point is that if we are going through difficulties as a country, that to be building a new head office structure at the cost of $250 million. The federal came out to say that the governor was incompetent and was quite not leading the institution very well. Hence, they tried having this demonstration in September. It wasn't successful. It has been rescheduled to October 3rd. And I cannot tell you, it's just based on the same issue of mismanagement, perceived corruption, perceived lack of value for money in the construction, and then the insensitivity considering the fact that the country went for IMF and they thought instead of the new head office, which is quite expensive for them. And as we speak, the structure is not properly completed, but the cost keeps going up. And they are wondering how much more we are going to add. So other opposition parties, PNC, PPP, have joined in, another civil society organizations and individuals would want to support this coming up on the 10th. So like I mentioned earlier, it is not the first, neither is it going to be the last demonstration we are going to see in Ghana as people perceive the economy to be hard and the fact that mismanagement and perceived corruption is also permanent.
Okay, thank you so much, Harrison Ahogwa, financial analyst from Ghana, and telling us what's going on there. We'll keep an eye on the track of what's going on in Ghana and hope it pans out, in a positive note. Thank you so much for joining us. Now we go over to other stories where Italy has cancelled debts amounting to $100 million owed by Egypt as part of the debt swap program between the two countries that began 20 years ago, and that's according to the Egyptian ambassador to Italy, Bassam Muradi. According to Mr. Radi, the debt swap program, which serves as a framework for bilateral development cooperation between the two countries, comes in several stages, with the implementation of this current phase signed last May. Also, $75 million have been allocated from the program to develop 6 advanced technological silos for storing grain in Egypt. Now, Morocco says it will offer subsidies to import up to 2 million metric tons of soft wheat between October the 1st and December the 31st as the North African country pursues a larger import program. In August, the chairman of the Millers National Federation said the country needed to import at least 2.3 million tons of soft wheat and 600,000 tons of durum wheat this year to make up for a shortfall in domestic crops. However, the government says it expects the cereals harvest to fall to 8 million tons this year, down 22% versus the previous year. Meanwhile, Morocco has raised tariffs for soft wheat imports to 135% from 90% for the June to December period to shield local farmers from foreign competition. Now, a team from South Africa's Stellenbosch University's Faculty of Engineering has developed and successfully tested the country's first electric minibus taxi. Now, South Africa's electric vehicle EV industry lags behind those of many other countries amid the global race to move to clean energy in the transport sector, as it has only about 2,300 EVs among a total of 12 million passenger vehicles on the road. Meanwhile, South Africa's transport sector is the second biggest polluter after power industry, accounting for 13% of carbon emissions, with road transport accounting for 91.2% of these transport emissions. And that's a wrap now for Business Incorporated. Do join us tomorrow for another edition. I'm Will Ibang. Thanks for watching.